Yes, that's my knife. Your fingerprints are on it. We found it at the murder scene. That's impossible. It was in my tool bag when I left. The record says you were there until 6:41.
No, I left at 6:12.
Then why does the record say otherwise?
Because that record is wrong.
Your knife, your fingerprints, a witness, the gate records. Stop lying and admit what you did.
I'm not lying. I did not kill that man.
You killed him, and your kind always thinks somebody else will take the fall. The accusation landed across interview room 3 at the Franklin County Justice Center. Before, Jerome Mitchell had even touched the paper cup beside him. At 68, the retired Black Army veteran had spent decades learning how to remain steady when other people expected fear. He needed that discipline now. A detective placed an evidence photograph on the metal table. It showed Jerome's engraved pocket knife beside a leather chair inside the Hayes estate. Jerome stared at it. "That was not there when I left." The detective leaned back. "Your fingerprints are on it. A witness places you at the house. The Hayes family says you argued with the victim." Jerome lifted his eyes. "I used that knife to open packing boxes that afternoon. I put it back in my tool bag before I left." The detective said nothing. Through the narrow window beside the interview room door, Jerome could see Edward Hayes standing in the corridor with an attorney. Edward looked composed in an expensive charcoal suit, speaking quietly as though the building belonged to him. Jerome looked back at the photograph. Something about it bothered him beyond the knife. The chair, the angle, the room itself. He had never entered that room. "Who found this?" Jerome asked. The detective gathered the photographs instead of answering. "Right now, Mr. Mitchell, you need to understand how serious this is." Jerome understood perfectly. Someone had taken an object he had handled and placed it where it could speak against him. Then movement beyond the window caught his attention. Edward had stepped away from his attorney. A younger man approached from the elevator, wearing the same brown service jacket Jerome remembered seeing near the Hayes property that night. Edward shook his hand, then guided him toward an empty conference room. Jerome watched the door close behind them. He had seen that man before. And suddenly, the knife was no longer the only thing in the room that did not belong beneath the fluorescent lights of the East Franklin Veterans Community Center, tightening a loose hinge on a supply cabinet while 2 volunteers stacked donated groceries behind him. Retirement had changed his schedule, but not the habits he had carried home from the Army. He arrived early. He returned borrowed tools clean. He remembered names. When Mrs. Coleman from 2 houses down needed someone to replace a porch light 12 feet above the ground, Jerome brought his ladder and refused payment. When the community center needed shelves repaired, he showed up with his own toolbox. That Thursday afternoon, the director handed him a work order from the Hayes Family Foundation. Their annual veterans benefit was scheduled for the following week, and the family needed someone experienced to inspect temporary storage fixtures and several security doors at their estate before equipment arrived. Jerome almost declined. He disliked wealthy homes where workers were expected to become invisible, but the foundation was paying the community center for the inspection, and that money would help cover winter programs. At 4:20 that afternoon, Jerome drove his 12-year-old pickup through the stone entrance of the Hayes estate. Edward Hayes met him near the service wing. At 61, Edward carried wealth quietly, but unmistakably. His charcoal jacket fit perfectly. His shoes looked untouched by dust. His handshake was firm, brief, and immediately followed by a glance at Jerome's toolbox. "Maintenance entrance is around back," Edward said. Jerome looked at the work order in his hand. "I am here for the Veterans Center inspection." Edward paused. His expression changed only slightly. "Of course." Jerome had seen that pause before. The moment when someone realized the black man standing in front of them was not there to carry something away or clean something up. He did not challenge it. He followed Edward inside and began checking the assigned areas. Near the event storage room, Jerome used his engraved pocket knife to cut plastic straps from a shipment of folding display panels. He closed the blade, wiped it clean, and returned it to the front compartment of his canvas tool bag. He remembered doing it because the engraving caught the light. His late wife had given him that knife on their 35th anniversary. 40 minutes later, Jerome was checking a security latch near the rear hallway when raised voices traveled through a partially closed office door. Edward was speaking to another family member. "If this gets out, everything we built is finished." A second voice answered too softly for Jerome to understand. Jerome stepped away. Whatever argument belonged to that family was none of his business. As he headed toward the service exit, a younger man in a brown service jacket passed him carrying a small equipment case. Jerome nodded. The man did not return the greeting. Outside, Jerome placed his toolbox behind the passenger seat and checked the time on his dashboard. 6:12 p.m. Before pulling away, he glanced toward the estate. Edward stood behind an upstairs window, watching the driveway. Jerome drove home, believing his work there was finished. 3 days later, sitting inside interview room 3, he finally understood that someone else had decided it was only begin. While Jerome drove home that Thursday evening, Edward Hayes remained at the estate, standing behind the upstairs window until the old pickup disappeared beyond the stone gates. Then he turned away. The house around him carried the polished silence of money that had been protected for generations. Family photographs lined the hallway. Framed development awards covered the study walls. On Edward's desk sat plans for the largest project his company had attempted in 20 years. A riverfront redevelopment worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The final approval was less than 2 weeks away. Any serious scandal connected to the Hayes name could threaten investors, public contracts, and everything Edward had spent decades building. Inside the study, his younger brother, Richard, paced beside the fireplace. "He knows there was an argument," Richard said. Edward remained calm. "He heard voices. That is not the same thing." "He was here." Edward looked toward the closed door. That was the problem. Jerome had been there. He had entered through the service wing. He had handled equipment. He had moved through several rooms for the inspection. His presence existed in visitor records, staff memory, and security logs. To Edward, those facts did not make Jerome guilty. They made him useful. A family attorney seated near the desk closed a folder. "Police will ask who was on the property today if this becomes relevant." Edward's eyes shifted toward him. "And what will they see?" "A contractor from the Veterans Center. No family connection. No reason to protect him." Edward's jaw tightened. "He is not a contractor." The attorney waited. Edward corrected himself. "Not exactly." The distinction seemed important only for a moment. Then Richard spoke again. "People will believe he was here for maintenance." Edward did not answer. Earlier, he had assumed exactly that when Jerome arrived. The memory should have embarrassed him. Instead, under pressure, it became part of the calculation forming in the room. Jerome was older, black, working with tools, unconnected to anyone powerful inside the house. If questions came later, suspicion would not have to travel far before finding him. A soft knock interrupted them. The younger man in the brown service jacket entered, carrying the same equipment case Jerome had seen near the rear hallway. Edward dismissed Richard and the attorney with a glance. When the room was empty, he asked the man one question. "Can the security record be corrected?" The man hesitated. "Corrected how?" Edward walked to his desk and opened a drawer. "I need the timeline to reflect what this family remembers." He removed a white envelope and placed it on the polished wood between them. The younger man stared at it. but did not reach forward. Edward's voice remained low. "Nobody is asking you to invent anything." The man looked up. Edward held his gaze. "Only make sure the wrong details do not become the story." Outside the study, somewhere deeper in the house, a door closed. Edward glanced toward the sound. When he looked back, the envelope was gone. By 7:40 that evening, Jerome was home, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, cooling beside the Veterans Center paperwork. He had no reason to think about the Hayes estate again. Until his phone rang. A detective asked whether he had been at the property that afternoon. Jerome answered yes. Then came the question that made him sit straighter. "What time did you leave?" 6:12. Jerome looked toward the truck keys on the counter. "I checked the dashboard before I pulled out." The detective asked whether anyone could confirm it. Jerome thought about the younger man in the brown service jacket, then about Edward watching from the upstairs window. "At least 2 people saw me leave." The detective thanked him and ended the call without explaining what had happened. Jerome slept little that night. By morning, local news vehicles were parked outside the Hayes estate. A man connected to the family had been found dead inside the house after Jerome left. The reports offered few details, but one sentence caught Jerome's attention. Investigators were reviewing everyone who had been on the property. Jerome called the community center director and told her exactly what he knew. Then he opened his canvas tool bag. His measuring tape was there. Screwdrivers, flashlight, work gloves. The front compartment was open. Jerome reached inside once, then again. The engraved pocket knife was missing. He stood motionless. He remembered cutting the plastic straps. He remembered closing the blade. He remembered the engraving catching the light before he returned it to the bag. By noon, detectives were at his door. Jerome cooperated. He gave them his work order, his route, and the names of the people he had seen. He also told them about the missing knife. That detail changed the room. One detective stopped writing. "When did you notice it was gone?" "This morning." "Convenient." Jerome looked at him. "Accurate." The detective held his gaze, then continued taking notes. Later, investigators showed Jerome a security timeline from the estate. According to the record, his vehicle had remained inside the property until 6:41. Jerome shook his head. "That is wrong." The detective pointed to the page. "The gate system says otherwise." Jerome remembered pulling onto Oak Ridge Road while the dashboard clock showed 6:12. He remembered stopping at the red light near St. Matthew's Church. He remembered an SUV passing him from the opposite direction, dark blue, large enough to recognize. The Hayes family kept a similar vehicle near the garage. "Check the road cameras," Jerome said, "and check the church intersection." The detective closed the folder. "We will check everything." But 2 days later, the evidence photograph was sitting in interview room 3, and Jerome's knife had somehow traveled from his tool bag into a room he had never entered. Now, another memory returned, with uncomfortable clarity. As Jerome had walked toward the service exit that evening, the dark blue Hayes SUV was still parked inside the garage. Yet the official family statement claimed that vehicle had left the estate before 5:30. Jerome looked through the interview room window, toward the conference room where Edward had disappeared with the man in the brown jacket. 2 pieces of the timeline could not both be true, and Jerome was beginning to understand which version someone had paid to preserve. By Monday morning, Jerome's name had moved beyond the interview room. A local television station described him as a person of interest who had been working inside the Hayes estate hours before the death. The report did not call him guilty, but the photograph they used made the distinction feel thin. Jerome watched for less than a minute before turning off the television. His attorney, Rachel Bennett, sat across from him at the kitchen table, with 3 folders open between them. "The knife is bad," she said. "The gate record is worse." Together, they give investigators a timeline they can explain to a jury. Jerome folded his hands. "It is still the wrong timeline." Rachel nodded. "Then we break it with something independent." Jerome told her again about the dark blue SUV, the church intersection, and the man in the brown service jacket. Rachel had already requested traffic camera records. The camera near St. Matthew's had been offline for maintenance that evening. The nearest city camera faced the opposite direction. Jerome absorbed the news without speaking. Then Rachel opened another folder. There is more. A temporary estate worker had given investigators a statement, claiming Jerome seemed angry before leaving. Jerome looked at her. "Who?" Rachel slid a photograph across the table. It was the younger man from the service hallway, the same man Edward had taken into the conference room at the Justice Center. Jerome felt something settle heavily inside him. "He never spoke to me." "He says he heard you arguing with someone." "That did not happen." Rachel studied his face. "I believe you. Belief is not what we need." Jerome looked toward the framed army photograph on the shelf across the room. For decades, his name had meant something simple to him. It belonged to a husband, a soldier, a neighbor, a man who returned tools and kept promises. Now strangers were discussing that name beside the word murder. That frightened him more than he wanted to admit. Not because reputation mattered more than freedom, but because lies had a way of surviving after facts arrived. His grandchildren would see headlines. People at the Veterans Center would hear whispers. Someone would always remember the accusation more clearly than the correction. Rachel's phone vibrated. She read the message twice. Investigators found a payment to the temporary worker. Jerome looked up. From Edward. Not directly. A consulting company connected to one of the Hayes businesses paid him $8,000 2 days after the incident. Jerome remained still. For what? The invoice says emergency technical services. He was carrying an equipment case. Rachel nodded. That could be legitimate. Jerome understood the warning. Suspicion was not proof, even when suspicion finally pointed away from him. Rachel closed the folder, then hesitated. There is one more thing. A housekeeper told police she saw another person near the rear hallway after 6 o'clock. Jerome leaned forward. Who? She would not say. Then she stopped returning calls. The room became quiet. Jerome thought of the upstairs window, the SUV, and the missing knife. Somewhere between 6:12 and 6:41, someone had rewritten his evening. And somewhere outside that kitchen, one person might still know exactly how. That night, Jerome sat alone at his kitchen table after Rachel left, listening to the refrigerator hum beneath the silence of the house. The television remained off. His phone rested face down beside the folders. He had stopped checking the news hours earlier. Every headline seemed to reduce his life to one afternoon at the Hayes estate, as though 68 years could be erased by a photograph and a corrupted timestamp. Jerome opened a small notebook and wrote down the evening again. 4:20 arrival, 5:14 storage room inspection, 5:38 rear security latch, 6:12 departure. He closed his eyes and returned to the drive home. The red light near St. Matthew's Church, the dark blue SUV approaching from the opposite direction. Then, something else came back. His phone had connected automatically to the truck speakers just before the intersection. A voicemail had begun playing. Jerome reached for his phone and searched the saved messages. There it was, 6:16 p.m. A volunteer from the Veterans Center had called about folding tables for Saturday. Jerome remembered listening to the message while waiting at the light. It did not prove where he was, but it gave Rachel another fixed point to investigate. He forwarded it to her. Across town, the missing housekeeper sat in a small apartment with the curtains closed. Her name was Elena Ruiz, and she had worked for the Hayes family for 11 years. She had seen Jerome leave through the service entrance. She had also seen the dark blue SUV still inside the garage afterward. More important, she had been carrying fresh linens past the rear hallway when the younger man in the brown service jacket returned from Edward's study. He had stopped beside Jerome's unattended tool bag. Elena had seen him reach toward it. At the time, the movement meant nothing. The next morning, after police arrived, Edward had spoken to her privately. He never threatened her. He did something quieter. He reminded her that the Hayes Company owned the apartment building where her daughter lived. He mentioned the medical insurance attached to Elena's employment. Then he asked whether she was certain about what she remembered. Fear had done the rest. For days, Elena ignored investigators. She told herself that Jerome had an attorney. She told herself police would find the truth without her. Then she saw his photograph on television, beneath words that made him look guilty before any trial had begun. Elena lowered her eyes. On her kitchen counter sat an old parking receipt from the Hayes Estate employee lot. She had left briefly that evening to pick up medication, then returned through the service gate. The receipt showed 6:23 p.m. Printed beneath the time was the gate lane number. Elena remembered what had happened as she drove back in. The dark blue Hayes SUV had passed her going out. Jerome's pickup was nowhere on the property. She picked up her phone, then set it down, picked it up again. At Jerome's house, the clock moved past 11. He closed his notebook and turned off the kitchen light. Across town, Elena finally dialed the number on the investigator's card. When someone answered, her voice shook once, then steadied. "My name is Elena Ruiz. I was at the Hayes house that night. I need to correct what I told you." Elena Ruiz arrived at the Franklin County Justice Center shortly after 8 the next morning, carrying the parking receipt inside a clear plastic sleeve. She asked to speak with the investigator assigned to the Hayes case, then repeated her account from the beginning. She had seen Jerome leave through the service entrance before 6:15. His pickup was already gone when she returned at 6:23. The dark blue Hayes SUV passed her at the service gate as she entered. Then she described the moment that changed the room. Before leaving for the pharmacy, Elena had seen the younger man in the brown service jacket standing beside Jerome's unattended tool bag. "What was he doing?" the investigator asked. Elena swallowed. His hand was inside the front compartment. The investigator did not react. "Did you see what he removed?" "No." "Then tell me only what you saw." Elena nodded. "I saw his hand inside Mr. Mitchell's bag." She explained Edward's conversation with her the following morning. She repeated his references to her daughter's apartment and her employment insurance. The investigator wrote everything down, then looked at the receipt. "Why did you keep this?" "I keep receipts until my credit card statement arrives." Within hours, investigators obtained the parking system record connected to Elena's transaction. 6:23 p.m., Lane 2. They pulled service gate data that had been stored separately from the estate's primary visitor system. That record showed Elena entering at 6:24. 38 seconds earlier, a vehicle registered to Hayes Development Group had exited through the same lane. The investigators requested additional records. A commercial building across Oak Ridge Road had an exterior camera facing part of the intersection. The image was distant, but the timestamp was clear. At 6:14, Jerome's 12-year-old pickup crossed the frame heading away from the Hayes estate. Rachel Bennett received the call just before noon. She found Jerome at the Veterans Center, repairing the same cabinet hinge he had left unfinished days earlier. "Jerome!" He heard something different in her voice and set down the screwdriver. They found a camera. Rachel told him about the 6:14 timestamp. Then she told him Elena had come forward. Jerome sat slowly in a folding chair. He did not smile. Is she safe? Rachel paused. That is your first question. She stayed quiet because she was afraid. Rachel nodded. Investigators are handling it carefully. Back at the Justice Center, Elena was shown a photograph of the younger man in the brown jacket. She identified him immediately. Investigators then placed the $8,000 payment record beside his earlier statement accusing Jerome of being angry. The detective who had questioned Jerome stared at both documents for several seconds. "We need to verify every piece," he said. Nobody disagreed. That afternoon, a forensic analyst completed the first review of the commercial camera file and the parking system data. The video had not been edited. The transaction record had not been altered. The timestamps aligned within seconds of the ServiceGate server. The analyst looked toward the lead investigator. The timing is genuine. For the first time since Jerome's knife appeared in a room he had never entered, the evidence was no longer asking whether he had lied. It was asking who had needed everyone to believe that he had. By late afternoon, the investigation had stopped moving in one direction. Detectives compared the commercial camera footage with the estate gate records, Elena's parking transaction, Jerome's saved voicemail, and the original visitor log. Jerome's pickup was already on Oak Ridge Road at 6:14. The estate system claimed he remained inside until 6:41. Both records could not be true. Investigators returned to the younger man in the brown service jacket. His name was Caleb Dunn, a temporary security technician, hired through a contractor that had worked for Hayes Development Group before. This time, detectives placed the $8,000 invoice on the table, beside his original statement. "Emergency technical services," one detective said. "What emergency?" Caleb stared at the invoice. His first answer was vague. His second contradicted the first. Then investigators showed him the separately stored ServiceGate data. His shoulders lowered. The story he had helped preserve was beginning to collapse around records he had not known existed. Caleb finally admitted that Edward had asked him to alter the estate's visitor timeline after Jerome left. He also admitted taking Jerome's pocket knife from the unattended tool bag. He insisted he had not known how far the plan would go. Detectives did not argue with him. They documented every word. The financial trail led next to the consulting company that had paid Caleb. Records showed the payment had been approved through an account controlled by Hayes Development Group. Edward was asked to return to the Justice Center. He arrived with counsel, wearing the same controlled expression Jerome had seen through the interview room window. This time, nobody asked Jerome to sit across from him. The evidence did not need a confrontation. Investigators showed Edward the 6:14 video. Then, Elena's 6:23 receipt. Then the ServiceGate record. Finally, they placed Caleb's payment authorization on the table. Edward looked at the documents for a long time. "I was protecting my family," he said. The lead investigator answered quietly. "You were directing suspicion toward a man you knew had already left." Edward said nothing. Elsewhere in the building, Jerome waited beside Rachel. He had spent days being told that every inconsistency made him look less believable. Now those same inconsistencies were exposing the people who had created them. The door opened. The prosecutor entered, carrying a thin file. She sat across from Jerome and spoke without ceremony. "Mr. Mitchell, the evidence no longer supports the charge against you. We are withdrawing it." Jerome looked at Rachel, then back at the prosecutor. Relief came slowly, almost cautiously. "What happens to my record?" "We will file the appropriate notice today." Jerome nodded. He could have stopped there. Instead, he asked, "And the people who did this?" The prosecutor rested both hands on the file. "That investigation is continuing." Jerome absorbed the answer. He did not ask for promises. He had learned what promises were worth, without evidence behind them. Before leaving, the prosecutor paused at the door. "For what it is worth, Mr. Mitchell, I am sorry this happened." Jerome met her eyes. "Then make sure the truth gets as much attention as the accusation did." 6 weeks later, Jerome Mitchell walked into the East Franklin Veterans Community Center, carrying the same canvas tool bag he had carried before anyone knew his name from the news. The loose cabinet hinge had already been repaired, but Jerome checked it anyway. Some habits survived, even the weeks that tried to change everything else. On the wall behind him, a local newspaper had printed a correction, stating that the case against Jerome had been withdrawn after independent evidence disproved the original timeline. The article also reported that investigators were examining evidence manipulation, witness interference, and financial records connected to Hayes Development Group. Edward Hayes had stepped away from company leadership while the investigation continued. Caleb Dunn was cooperating with authorities. No one pretended that every legal question had been resolved overnight. Jerome preferred it that way. Justice built on facts had nearly been taken from him once. He did not want revenge built on assumptions to replace it. Elena Ruiz had also returned to work elsewhere after receiving assistance from a witness advocacy program. Jerome asked Rachel to deliver one message to her. He did not thank Elena for saving him. He thanked her for choosing the truth when telling it had finally become difficult. That afternoon, Jerome stood near the community center entrance while volunteers arranged folding tables for a veteran's meal. A teenage boy, helping his grandfather, carried a box through the doorway, then stopped when he recognized Jerome. For a moment, the boy looked uncertain. Jerome had seen that expression before. It was the hesitation people carried when they knew an accusation but had not heard the correction. The boy set down the box. "Mr. Mitchell." Jerome turned. "Yes." The boy stepped closer and offered his hand. "My grandfather said I should know who you really are." Jerome looked at the hand, then shook it. Nothing else needed to be said. Across town, Edward sat inside a conference room while attorneys reviewed records from his company. The wealth that had once made consequences seemed negotiable, could not erase timestamps, payments, testimony, or archived data. His family name remained on buildings, contracts, and foundations, but it no longer controlled the story. Jerome's name belonged to him again. As evening settled over East Franklin, he carried the last folding table into the community hall. Someone had left the front door open, and warm light stretched across the sidewalk. Jerome stopped beneath it for a moment. 6 weeks earlier, strangers had looked at his photograph and decided what kind of man they thought they saw. Now the room behind him was filling with neighbors who had known him long before the accusation and stayed long enough to see the truth return. Jerome placed the table where it belonged, closed his toolbox, and looked around the room. No applause followed. No cameras waited outside. There was only the sound of chairs being unfolded, people calling one another by name, and ordinary life beginning again. Jerome picked up his coat, held the door for an older veteran walking inside, then stepped quietly into the evening.